In this 9th chapter of Erickson, he continues to develop the idea of understanding the being of God by stressing the idea of the greatness of God. How is God great? How do we understand such things? So the first question might be, who is God? Well, the most simple definition is that God is a spirit. Now what that means is he is not corporeal. The word corporeal means to have a body. So anything that actually has a physical body would be a corporeal being. Human, plant, animal, whatever, corporeal. But God is not corporeal in the sense he does not have a physical body. Orthodox Christianity teaches that God is not constituted by such a limitation. But second, it means he is personal. Well, it brings up the question then, how can you talk about God being a spirit and still being personal? Well, the question then is, what is a spirit? The simplest answer is that a spirit is a complex of attributes or personality with a non-corporeal or non-bodily existence. And the point of fact is that God is a spirit who exists without a body. I don't mind saying that probably we experience the same thing too, that we will not always be in our bodies, but the human spirit returns to God who gave it. And we certainly understand, speaking in the worldview of Orthodox Christianity, that there is a world beyond just the physical, which we all long for and hope for. But this brings up the question, is God limited? Is there any way in which his divine omnipotence and omniscience and omnipower and presence is limited? Well, not in the sense that we commonly define as limitation. In other words, you can't limit his power, you can't limit his knowledge, etc. But he is limited by his own nature. God cannot be what he is not. In other words, he cannot lie, cheat, murder, destroy, etc. God cannot be the opposite of what God is. Nor can he make a stone so big he can't lift it or a stick so large he can't break it. In other words, God conforms to the limits of his person expressed to us in a way that will not violate the law of contradiction, which is the first law of human logic. A thing cannot be something other than what it is. So God is going to be consistent with his own being. So he's not limited like we consider limitation. He is God in that he will always be God, and that is the only limitation that he might have. And without that limitation, of course, he would not be. So then how is God unlimited or infinite? What does it really mean to say he's infinite? Well, look at time. How is God related to time? Well, God has no beginning or ending. He is above all time. Now, we are called of-eternal beings. Latin prefix of means we had a beginning. So that means we were created, even though we will live forever. We were created beings. But God doesn't have any point when he was created. He is the foundation of all creation. And in space, is God fill up all of space? The best way to express this is to say that all of creation is somehow equally in the presence of God. A good way to say that. Just to think of him like either pantheism or panentheism, either one would not really be biblical. But somehow we're all equally in his presence. And you're in his presence today, wherever you are this very day. We're all equally in his presence, and he knows us all equally. And then knowledge. What does God know? Now, the classical view is that God knows not only all things, but all possible things. So that he knows not only who you married, but who you might have married and what would have happened if you'd married them. So that he knows all possible things. Now, some people feel that pushes out a little far. Some feel that God knows only those things pertinent to his plan. And this gets into a more philosophical argument as to whether or not there is such a thing as middle knowledge in God. Parts of our lives that he wills not to know and leaves completely outside of his knowledge. And those things would bear another lecture. But your teacher opts for the classical view. I'll just take the classical view that God knows everything and live with the difficulty and be sure that I'm more consistent in understanding the omni-nature of God as the ultimate spiritual being. And then how about power? God is all-powerful, limited only by his own nature. So we're back to that question. He cannot be what he is not, and he cannot do those things which would violate his goodwill and his being as love. So he's all-powerful, but his power does not conflict with his nature as a good, loving, and personal God. And then he's also unchangeable. The technical word for that is immutable, but Erickson uses the word constancy. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And scriptures which portray him as changing his mind or his will are expressions of human perspectives concerning his actions. So we are describing what we are seeing, but the immutable plan of God does not change. And the technical term immutability expresses the fact that God is not subject to any force or law exterior to his own nature. And you must be careful about streams of theology that produce some type of spiritual law by which you can control God. God will not be controlled by any law, by any term, by any saying. He is unchangeable and not subject to any force or law exterior to his own nature.